Hi folks, Steve here. A bit more on the Samick Discovery. I've done a couple of things. When I first saw this demonstrated on the Archery Supplies YouTube channel, Steve Hahn was saying it was a really quiet bow. He was shooting off a centre rest at the time, but that's not. He was also saying that it didn't screw in far enough to give him good centre shot, so I was a bit averse to the idea of using one of those, and I prefer the adjustability of a flipper and a plunger as well. But one thing I did notice when I first got it shooting and started putting arrows through it, it's a noisier bow than I've ever shot. The string was making slapping noises on the limbs. It had a bit of a distinctive twang about it, and I'll go into this in a bit more detail, but the rest was buzzing and rattling and carrying on after the shot. So I've gone and done a couple of things. I've used some heavy duty Velcro, the soft loopy part, and put just under, it's about ½ an inch into the groove on the string. It's roughly where you'd put one of those little rubber stop things that they've got out for recurves now. They can be quite expensive, but I've used the Velcro on a previous bow and I was quite happy with the result. There's no slapping, so they're on there. They're quite nice. They're not terribly obtrusive. They're nice and light, so they're not going to affect the limbs in any way during the shot. And I've gone to the next step and put some puffs on the string. Just wool, synthetic wool obviously, 100% polyester or something, a few different colours. And that stuff's pretty waterproof, and if it does get wet while you're out shooting a couple of arrows, and it's I wouldn't use it for a hunting situation maybe, but if you're shooting targets you can just sort of flick the string a few times and the water will spray off. And the other noise that I get is this arrow rest, which has a little bit of play in it. It's fine where it's set. The arrow sits in the right attitude alongside the plunger button. But when you give the bow a twang, there's a definite buzzing sound. If I put my thumb on it, so apart from that little sound there, the bow's very quiet now while I'm shooting it. So just those little puffs have done wonders. I thought I was on 0 tiller, but after I took a bit more time to measure it, I had to just move one flat on the hex key on the bottom limb and just loosen it that tiny bit more. I had about a millimetre more on the top limb than the bottom. Now I've got perfect 0 tiller. Whether it's critical or not, I don't know. Most people say if you shoot 3 under, which is my particular style, 0 tiller is about the best place to start. People say if you're shooting split finger, one finger over the arrow, that you should have 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch of tiller on the top limb. I think that's positive tiller. And people who string walk and make their way down the string walking is another technique, but I don't want to go there. Yeah, they might use a bit of negative tiller and have a little bit more flex in the bottom limb and a little bit more tension in the top limb. This thing is it's like a chalk magnet. Fingernails, you can write on it with your thumbnail. I made the mistake, I was using an outdoor garden chair, tubular steel, white paint, and I was resting my bow on the armrests of the chair, sort of between either side of the riser like that, in between shots when I was shooting. And I started to find I was getting these crazy white marks all over my limbs. I ended up using a bit of furniture polish to ease them off, and they've gone now. But yeah, so it's a really sensitive, touchy, sensitive finish. I had white marks on here. I have no idea what they were from. I don't know what it touched. So I'm half thinking they have got a dark green. They've got a sort of a gold colour. They've got a sand they call it desert sand. They've got a khaki sort of colour, and they've got a dark green as well as the black. And I was thinking the dark green would be nice. I used to have a green bow. I quite liked it, but I've since turned to black, and I've been using black bows for years. So black it is, and I just have to be wary of what comes into contact with it. Even the arrows brushing against this part of the shelf, some of the labelling on the arrows leaving little red marks on there, that just rubs off, but still. The other thing that I've found with this cheap copy of a Spigarelli is that nothing stops it going in towards the sight window. So I've put a little bit of thin green felt there just as a stopper, because I was starting to see a little mark developing just under the wire there. I had to shorten the rest about 3/4 of an inch because it was long enough to use the plunger in the front hole. Why someone would want to do that, I don't know, because the pivot point of the bow is in line with the back hole, and that's where you get the least amount of torque movement on the tip of the arrow. So this is a cheap and nasty, and I'm regretting it a little bit because it's got this rattle. I think there are better ones out there. I've always used free flights, AAE free flight rests, and they've worked quite well, and I haven't noticed any sort of noise from them. And I think there's a point where they actually stop, so you can move the rest across so that it's actually clearing the riser without coming into contact with it. As for that's a Spigarelli rip-off, not a very good one. It's still putting the arrow where I need it to be, so I'm going to keep shooting with it for the time being. The biter rip-off, not a great thing either. They only come with one spring. The biters come with soft, medium and hard springs. This just comes with one spring, so instead of using a medium spring and having this thing screwed down halfway for a medium kind of setting, it's got one spring which is probably going to cater for the hard end of the spectrum, and it's almost screwed right out, so it's got a little bit of wobble. I've tightened up the adjustment screw, wanting to get a nice tight click, and I found that when you move it a few times it sort of loosens up. So it might be a case of finding a position for it. I'm pretty happy with where I've got it at the moment, and my arrows are grouping reasonably well. Yeah, and locking it down so it doesn't actually turn. So I think there's better plungers out there as well. The limbs on this are very nice. The poundage is a little bit lower than I was getting with my bamboo limb black hunter. It was a 40 pound at 28 inches, and by the time I was reaching my draw length I was getting approximately 48, 47, 48 and a half even. And this bow at the moment it's just on 40 pounds at 28, and when I get to my draw length it's going about 44, which is nice. It's actually easier to hold and aim. It's a bit more forgiving, and I think the slightly longer limbs, the other bow is 60 inch, this is 62. I know the longer limbs the more forgiving the bow. It still spits the arrows out at a good speed. My 500 spine arrows, I've got them cut down to 30 1/4 inches, and I'm still only putting an 85 grain point in, or they show up soft when I do bare shaft shooting. So I'm happy with the way this is going so far. I haven't dialed it down because I want to build myself up. The only reason I'd be putting more poundage on this would be if somewhere down the track I bought stiffer arrows. I just want what I have to work for me. So I'm pretty happy with where they're grouping at the moment. Unfortunately, I can't get out onto a longer distance. I'm only shooting at about 14 to 15 yards in my garden, and that's not really far enough for proper bare shaft and centre shot tuning. So, and the other thing happened, this started to work itself loose. It's a bit tight now because I keep tweaking it a little bit so that it doesn't do that. But it does come with tools, so I'm not going to have any problems taking that off. So what we have here is a 17-inch riser with what would be classed as long limbs. Long limbs on a 25-inch riser, which is the benchmark, all the limbs are rated at what they would come to on a 25-inch riser. So when you're shopping for limbs, quite often you'll see 66, 68, 70 inches, and that's the overall length of the bow that you end up with those limbs on a 25-inch riser. So if I were to put these limbs on a 25-inch riser, it would go 70 inches. If this were a 60-inch bow, if I'd chosen the slightly shorter limbs, it would go 68 inches. And what tends to happen with limb lengths is if you put short limbs on, you get a little bit more arrow speed. But if you put long limbs on, you gain a bit of forgiveness and a bit of smoothness. So I'm very happy with all the compromises that are a result of the way this is set up at the moment. The plunger's working. How long it'll work for, I don't know. I thought a cheap plunger might just not last a very long time, but this one wasn't very nice at the get-go. So it's probably worth investing a little bit more in your accessories and getting a decent product to begin with. So that's where we're up to. I'm loving the sound of the bow. It's almost nothing. It's just a very low dunk. I could probably lower the poundage if I wanted to, and I can take it up plenty if I want to as well. So I've got plenty of adjustment. It's right in my power range. My arrows are flying very well. I'm using Victory V-Force arrows, 500 spine as I said. I use pin knocks on them because I like to add a little bit of weight to the back of the arrow, and that theoretically makes it a tiny bit stiffer, but it's not really noticeable. I could put wraps on them, but I don't like wraps because they're hard to get off if you need to refletch the arrows. So it's all coming together nicely. Hopefully next time I jump on here, I'll be able to do a shooting video and see if I can shoot a group under the scrutiny of the camera. So I hope you guys are interested. If you like it, like it. If you want to subscribe and find out what's going on with my journey, please do so. Any hints or tips you want to put in the comments, by all means. And I'm always open to criticism and suggestions and anything that'll help me learn, because I think archery is a bit like fly fishing. Once you start, you never stop learning. You find something new out about it all the time. I'm not in a huge hurry to get the tuning on this finalised, because I think 90% of what happens when you're doing tuning is dependent very much on having your own good form to start with. If you've got inconsistent form, moving things around on your bow is not going to make a real difference to how you're shooting. So once you can shoot really consistently, and perhaps it's more important to be consistent than accurate. If you're grouping arrows in a small area, even if they're all off to the left or off to the right or slightly high or slightly low, that's better than hitting the middle and doing bad shots. So it's important to work on your form. That's why I like this, because I can do it every day. With my compound bow, I'd have to go out to the range, it's a big hard case, the stabilizers, it's all packed away at the end of the shooting. You've got to pull it all out and assemble it and put it all together. All I've got to do with this is stick my stabilizer on there, one little one, throw a few arrows in my pocket, walk out in the yard and shoot, and it's wonderful. It's just very therapeutic, and especially at this lockdown time too, when people are looking for things to do. I can go out there and shoot 30 or 40 arrows, and I feel good, and especially if I'm seeing improvement. That's a real form of edification, I guess. It encourages you to keep going. So anyone that's out there shooting a bow and struggling, don't worry about tuning. Work on your form. Don't worry where you're hitting. Look for groups. See if you can get your arrows to get closer and closer together without smashing them. Obviously, that's a bit of a nasty side effect, but still, it's all good. Archery is a great thing. It's been around for a long time, and I'm looking forward to making quite a lot more of these videos. So take care of yourselves, stay isolated for the time being, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.